Pharrell Williams is one of the most iconic producers in history. His blend of hip-hop, R&B, funk, and pop has created countless hits, from Snoop Dogg's Drop It Like It's Hot to Justin Timberlake's Rock Your Body.
Don't be so quick to walk away.
Pharrell has been running the charts for decades, with an insane run in the 2000s, producing tons of hits with his co-producer and co-founder of the Neptunes, Chad Hugo. And there's one thing that acts as the foundation to all of his success: the genius production behind his records. So today, we're gonna make an 100% original Pharrell-style beat inspired by the Neptunes era from start to finish. We're gonna go over all the production techniques used in his sound, and there's gonna be a ton of gems in this video that you can apply to your production. So sit back and get ready to go into the funky, groovy, and nostalgic world of Pharrell's production. When I think of Pharrell's production, a few things come to mind. First being stabby and groovy melodies, stuff with those like funk guitars and electric pianos. The second thing is cool, interesting chords. And the third thing, and I think the most iconic across all of the different styles of his music, are his iconic bouncy drums. I feel like across all the genres that he's produced in, his drums always stand out as the driving force behind the record. With some huge iconic songs he's done, really not even having a melody for most of the songs.
'Cause it ain't no holler back, girl. Ain't no holler back, girl.
My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard, and they're like, it's better than yours.
Yo, I go by the name of Pharrell.
So to start off, we're gonna dive into some Pharrell style drums and add in one of those signature Neptune style melodies later on. Anyways, Pharrell's iconic drum bounce sits around 95 to 110 BPM. So the first thing I did was set the tempo to 100 BPM and put down the super 90s 2000s rim shot from Drum Mastery, and just playing a standard snare pattern on the third and fourth beat just to get the bounce going. Now that we have that, it's time to add a key sound to get that 2000s Pharrell kind of sound: kick. The first thing that I personally think of when I think of these 2000s beats are these boomy, airy, stompy kind of kicks, similar to the ones on these records.
Few times I've been around that track, so it's not just gonna happen like that. 'Cause ain't
Pharrell from the Neptunes, and I just want to let y'all know.
On Clips' Grindin' specifically, I like how Pharrell uses multiple different kicks. There's like that one more normal kick that's kind of doing this A and B pattern with that more stompy, airy, boomy kind of kick. So in today's beat, we're gonna mess around with using multiple kick samples in the drum pattern to really give these kicks a thick, boomy sound that you would hear in these 2000s vibes. So I went into my drum mastery kit and I was looking for 3 completely different sounding kick samples. So I'm gonna play you the one shots, and I want you to really listen to how they have different characteristics. One is a more normal pop kind of kick sound. One of them is more boomy and low end heavy, kind of giving that stomp vibe. And the other one has that stomp kind of character, but it has some more high end to it. Choosing sounds that complement each other is super important, especially when you layer sounds. So my plan is to use that more normal pop sounding kick as the main like body of the kick, and then using those 2 stomp sounding kicks as more of like the character. Like I want it to sound like it has the character of those stomps, but with the knock of a normal kick. But now that we have the kick sound figured out, let's take a listen to Pharrell's kick patterns. Notice how they're super grouped.
I'm your pusher. The world is about to feel.
The reason these kicks sound bouncy is because of something called syncopation, which in basic terms just basically means putting the drums on the offbeat and accenting that part. So for example, a normal pop kick pattern would be like a 4 on the floor, bounce like this. So if we wanted to make this basic rhythm syncopated, instead of having stuff hit right on each beat like it is right now, we might move this one off like that, and then this one like this. Maybe something like this as the pattern. Right? So normally this kick would hit right here. We're just moving it a 16th note off. This one would normally hit right here. We're moving that an 8th note off. So you're just getting these like bouncier kind of patterns instead of that boom. It's more like kind of thing. This syncopation is essential to programming these Pharrell style drums, not just for kicks, but for all drums. So I kept that in mind and put down a super simple kick pattern. And I'm going to play it first with one kick sound, and then I'm going to layer in those other sounds so you can hear how layering the kick changes the sound. At this point, even with just the snare and the kicks, it's definitely giving that lunch table, schoolyard kind of feeling right now, which is exactly what we want. And you can hear that in those records like Hollaback Girl and Grinding by Clips. But anyways, next up, we're gonna add some more groove with the hi-hat. And as you can hear on songs like Hot in Here by Nelly, Pharrell likes to use more percussion kind of patterns with his hi-hats versus just a normal like two-step that you would typically program it. But it's more of like a cool stop and go pattern that you would use with a bouncy perk. So with that in mind, I put down this super simple accent hi-hat kind of pattern, and I made sure to do another thing that's essential to that Pharrell bounce. Swing. Essentially, swing is when the drums aren't playing perfectly in time with each other, and it gives it a nice groovy and human kind of sound that you can hear in a lot of Pharrell's drums. And a lot of people will be a little bit lazy to try to get this swing effect, and they'll just take something like the hi-hats and just move it a little bit off time, all the same amount off time. And while this does help a little bit with that human bounce, it still kind of has a robotic sound. Because if you think back to the 90s and 2000s, producers like Pharrell, Kanye, and everyone who was making beats back then was having to physically play stuff in on these drum machines. So the way to get that really human kind of swing is to go in on the MIDI pattern and move every single note a little bit off time. Maybe one's a little early, one's a little late, one's really late, one's perfectly on beat. Everything is not perfect. Anyways, I did that with this pattern, and you get this. And while we're on the hi-hat, Pharrell does have some beats where he uses a more simple, predictable kind of hi-hat pattern. And I really like how he used these live acoustic hi-hat kind of sounds in a lot of his tracks. So I went into the pop folder inside of Drum Mastery and found a live hi-hat, and then put down a super simple quarter note hi-hat pattern, but I made sure to go in and move everything a little bit off beat to add some swing. Finally, we have one more element we need to add to these drums to get that signature Pharrell sound: percussion. And one of the most iconic percussions that instantly comes to mind when I think of a Pharrell beat is the cowbell. You can hear Pharrell's influence with these cowbell kind of sounds even in huge modern hits like Popular by The Weeknd.
Tell me, do you see her? She's living her life.
Honestly, I just love this drum sound so much, so I had to add it to these drums. And I made sure to put down a bouncy kind of pattern, emphasizing those offbeats to really give it that 2000s Pharrell feel. That's sounding fire, and the drums are done at this point. Now we got to build out the rest of the beat. But before that, I just want to say that one of the most important aspects of Pharrell's production, Timbaland, and a bunch of these other 2000s producers is that they were using really unique sounds. A lot of these percussion sounds are super weird, or there's weird sound effects or weird kick sounds. So when you're choosing sounds, don't be afraid to use some weird stuff. However, nowadays, a lot of the drum kits are just the same exact sounds that you've been getting in every single pack. So if you're tired of having recycled drum sounds and you want unique drum sounds that actually sound good, that are actually usable, I just dropped Drum Mastery, which I think without a doubt is the best drum kit out right now. It's got drums for pop, experimental stuff with some really weird non-recycled sounds, R&B, soul, boom bap, Afro beats, reggaeton, and some hard-hitting trap stuff. But it's not just drum sounds. It comes with matching perk loops played with live session players, live drummers playing in live hi-hat loops, drum fills, drum loops that have stems, melody loops in the kit, as well as fully mixed and pre-sound selected project templates. All this stuff for every different genre. All the drum sounds used in this video are from Drum Mastery, so if you like the way this is sounding, definitely click the first link in the description to go check that out. But anyways, now it's time to get into the other half of Pharrell's production, the melodies. When I think of this Neptune's era Pharrell style, there are two core melodic sections that Chad Hugo and Pharrell would do. The first being a rhythmic, stabby kind of chord section, and the second being chords that are played out a little bit longer, more sustained for like a bridge or breakdown section. They would often use these more stabby, super groovy patterns as the main loop for the entire song, but then they break the repetitiveness up by having these super long, drawn out chords for a hook, a breakdown, or a bridge section.
I wanna rock your body, please stay. Why did you come
to dance with you.
I wanna sound full of myself a room, but you ain't looking at no other dudes.
I call you Pharrell, you the truth. So we're gonna do a stabby A section, and then we're gonna do a chord switch up for the B section, starting off with the A section. The first and most important thing you can do when you're trying to make these Neptunes inspired melodies is go download the Korg Triton VST, which by the way has a free demo. Every melodic sound that you're about to hear is from this VST. Reason being, Pharrell and Chad Hugo made the Korg Triton their signature sound. So if you download the plugin, you'll pretty much have the exact same sounds that they were using back in the 2000s. Anyways, the most iconic sound that I can think of for those more stabby, groovy kind of sections are these funky guitars. You can hear these in countless Pharrell records, with a good amount of them sounding much more live play, like they actually had a guitarist record it. For the inspiration on this beat, I purposely wanted to reference songs like Hot in Here, Rock Your Body, and I Just Wanna Love You by Jay-Z. If you listen to these records, the stabby guitar sound sounds super digital and fake.
Hustler, baby. Hustler. I just want you to know. Let you know.
Normally, I don't really want to go for cheap sounding stuff, but I feel like that cheap sound is essential to that 2000s kind of aesthetic. So I went into the Korg Triton and found this chorus E guitar preset that sounds like this. And once I had the sound, I needed to come up with a chord progression. Quick note, whenever you're playing in these chords or drawing them in, you want to make sure that you're playing it super rhythmically with short little chord stabs. You want the melody to almost make you want to dance by itself without any of the drums. Anyways, for this melody, I want to use a go-to progression if you want to get that Neptunes Pharrell vibe instantly. All right, so one of the go-to progressions that you can use to instantly get that 2000s nostalgic kind of feeling is starting with a minor chord. So if we just click it in real quick, you would start on any note in the keyboard, and then you would skip 2 notes up to that note, and then skip 3 notes up to this next note. Right? That's a minor triad chord. And then for the second chord, all you want to do is move up 1 note with this bottom note and make a major. So you're just going from a minor up 1 note to a major chord. A major is the exact same amount of notes. You're just changing the position of this middle note. So the way that I like to think about it, copying and pasting this over like that, and then you just move this note up 1 to make it a major chord. So this one has 3 spaces from the bottom to the middle and 2 spaces from the middle to the top note. So anyways, you make a major chord and then you just move this up 1 note like this, and this is the progression. Which obviously doesn't sound very Pharrell-like right now. So that's where playing it with some rhythm comes into play, with something like this. So for our beat, I played those chords mainly relying on that first E minor chord, and then at the very end of each pattern going up to that F major, as well as having some low bass notes moving around a little bit in the pattern. 100% has that cheap 2000s kind of sound right now, but it's definitely a little empty, so I want to fill this out. Another go-to sound that you can hear these staccato, stabby kind of melodies being played on is an electric piano, like the one that you hear on Nelly's Hot in Here. So I played those same chords that we did on the guitar, but I played them a little bit less complex, a little bit less rhythmically, just because I didn't want to overcomplicate the melody, and I also didn't want to just straight up copy and paste the MIDI down and make it sound too robotic. Anyways, this is what that sounds like. Now, before we get into adding some more synthy kind of sounds, there's one more fake acoustic kind of sound that I wanted to add, and it's some kind of muted clavinet or muted like guitar pluck kind of sound. You can hear Pharrell using this a lot, almost using it as a percussion. So I grabbed this muted electric guitar from the Triton and put down this pattern. Now, we got a good foundation, but it's time to sauce it up a little bit. We got a bunch of those stabby, rhythmic kind of patterns going, and I feel like it needs a little bit more melody. So to help with that, I thought it'd be perfect to add some synth leads, like the ones that you can hear on Front. I feel like the leads really set it off and give it that 2000s kind of vibe. And to get this like old, sexy R&B kind of sound, you want to look for triangle lead sounds and sine wave lead sounds. So I went into the Triton and grabbed 2 lead sounds, one that's meant to be more of an accent lead for the end of patterns, and one that plays more of a main lead line. And together, this is what those sound like. One key thing with these lead lines to really get that like smooth R&B kind of sound is to use this note interval right here. So there's one note in between these two notes. That's the main kind of sound that you want. You'll see this one right here where there's this little one note gap in between these lead notes. Then it goes down to this one, has another one note gap. Another one note gap right here. So when we put all those together, you get that really melodic R&B kind of sound. And if we even go in right here to the second lead melody, that little accent one at the end of the patterns, you can see again right here, this has a one note gap in between it. This has a one note gap in between it. And instead of going down one more note in the scale to land right here, we went down further so that we can have that little one note gap right there. Just really gives off that 90s, 2000s kind of vibe. Cool. So now that we've got that down, the main section is pretty much done. It's time to get into that B section. If you remember the examples that I played earlier, a lot of those records go into those B sections where it sounds a little bit more melodic and the chord progression changes a little bit. The chords play out longer and it's not so groovy. So the first thing I did was take that E piano that we had earlier and play a new chord progression using both of those chords that we used in the main progression, and I played a more drawn out progression that just kind of ascends up the scale and then comes back down the scale. So I like this progression, but we definitely need to fill it out with some more sounds. And a lot of these bridge chord switch up sections that you can hear in these Pharrell beats also have big synth chords like the ones you can hear on this song. So I copied that chord progression that we just played onto a synth sound, and I really like using these super digital, cheap sounding synths. I kind of do this like swelling, trippy kind of sound. But anyways, I found a sound with that kind of vibe, copied the chords to it, and then also took those root notes from the chord progression and copied it onto a synth bass from the Triton and got this. Finally, to finish off this whole melody, there's one more sound that just screams early 2000s to me, and it's those super digital sounding strings. I 100% wanted to incorporate some of those sounds, and I felt like the easiest way to do this was to just copy those chords on that bridge section onto some strings. So I did that, but I took it one step further. If you listen to the A section, I have the very last chord coming in with some strings that are kind of rising into that bridge section. Take a listen. And finally, I added another string orchestra kind of hit on the one, so that whenever I'm looping that part of the melody, whenever that violin riser kind of comes in and it loops back into that groovy part, there's a hit right there that kind of resolves that tension. From here, the melody was done. So it's time to bring it back into FL Studio where I programmed the drums. And the first thing I did in FL was pitch the whole melody down 2 semitones. I'm not sure why, I just felt like changing the key. Anyways, once I had that, I grabbed a synth bass from the drum mastery kit and put down this super simple bass line that follows the root notes of the A section of the melody. But I didn't want it to be too boring, so at the end of each 2 bars, you can see this more like groovy bass riff kind of thing coming in. Similar to how Pharrell did it on Justin Timberlake's Rock Your Body. Anyways, take a listen to the bass line on our beat. At this point, we have all the elements in place, but we're missing one key thing that instantly sets off the tone, his legendary 4-count intro.
Get up.
So I added that 4 count at the beginning of the beat, and you'll hear that in just a second once I play everything through. But once I had that, I just wanted to add a few more sound effects and finishing touches to the beat. So real quick, let's hop back in the computer and break all that down. All right, so the first thing I added was this little scratch effect on the 4 count right here. And then once everything comes in, you have this little breath that hits on the 1 and this little laser sound effect. And you can hear little details like this in a lot of Pharrell's music. And I feel like it just really adds to the whole vibe. Then if we move forward, you can see right here, we switch up to that more bridge kind of section. And I could have just kept the drums going like this, right? But instead what I did is I did this little almost 4-count kind of thing right here. And then I've also just taken the kick, like the first kick hit from this drum pattern and put it on each one of these chord switches so that there's kind of a time in the beat where the drums aren't going. It gives a little bit of space and it builds anticipation for when the drums do fully come back in right here. And I really built that anticipation with this little kick roll. So take a listen to this section. And as you can hear right there, I added little sound effects from the drum mastery kit. Another one right here. Side note, these little like sliding glide kind of sounds are perfect for these Pharrell beats. And then the last thing I did, taking some inspiration from some of the songs that Pharrell doesn't really use melodies. It's just like a bass line and drums for most of the song. I took out the melody completely for this last section. It's just the bass and drums, and then I added in that little breath chant just so it feels a little bit more full. Once I had all those effects and arrangement stuff in place, the beat was 100% finished. But before I play this through, quick reminder, if you like the drum sounds that you hear in this beat, every single one of them is from Drum Mastery, as well as so many more gems. So make sure to check out the first link in the description if you want to level up your drums and you're tired of getting the same drum kit recycled to you over and over again. Anyways, let's hear this beat. Thank you for making it to the end. Hope you enjoyed it. It was definitely something a little different than I normally do. But just one more reminder, if you want to level up your drums, make sure you check out that first link in the description for Drum Mastery. You won't regret it, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace.